Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Zelenskyy arrives at the White House for talks with President Trump as the two prepare to sign the rare minerals deal. Talking trade, the UK could swerve the wrath of Trump's tariffs as Starmer charms the US president in Washington. And blasting into the history books, Katy Perry signs up for an all-female flight to space with Jeff Bezos' company, Blue-Origin. Now, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived at the White House for a crucial meeting with President Donald Trump. He's expected to sign a major deal that will give the US access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals in exchange for aid and also military support. For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent Benji Hyer, who is in Washington for us. Benji, terms of the deal have been agreed, but Zelenskyy is pushing for Ukrainian security guarantees to be added, something Trump says should be dealt with by Europe. The leaders have got a fair bit to discuss before the deal is signed today. And we're also hearing from Donald Trump that he says you always have to make compromises, and certainly he will have to make compromises.
Yes, and we don't know whether that's necessarily in reference to Ukraine or Russia, but there is clearly a divergence, isn't there, between the two men as they sit side by side live now in the Oval Office behind me. We're expecting further comments from both of them to be televised in a couple of moments' time. They'll hold a press conference later on as well. The reality is that the stakes are extremely high, frankly existential for Ukraine, and this really is a now or never moment, at least according to Donald Trump, who says he wants this deal signed quickly, he says, or not at all. He will allow himself to, I'm sure, claim it as a victory. He sees this as a way towards a ceasefire and to recoup some or all or even more of the funds that the United States gave to Ukraine in order to bolster their defences amid Russia's invasion 3 years ago. The general contours of this deal are as follows. The general principle, at least, is that the US would have access to Ukrainian minerals, which could help the US in many different ways, Donald Trump says, their defense sector, AI, other forms of technology like electric vehicles. That's the economic side, but in terms of actually the peace deal side, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is very keen to have actual American assurances that there's going to be a security guarantee that the US will have Ukraine's back in the face of any potential Russian aggression. The two men, as they spoke in the Oval Office, talking about how these are the confines of a deal, just the first step. Mr. Trump maintaining that the agreement in its own right, though, would be a security guarantee given that there would be an American investment in Ukraine. This is symbolic that President Zelenskyy is here, that the two men are coming together to sign this agreement, but there's still a lot to be decided and a lot more details to come out about exactly what security guarantees the US may or indeed may not provide the war-torn nation of Ukraine.
Yes, indeed, Benji, and everyone's going to be waiting for those details to come out later today. Their meeting comes just a week after Zelenskyy said Trump was living in a disinformation space created by Russia. And of course, Trump accused Zelenskyy of being a dictator, a comment he since said he can't believe he actually said. So their relationship seems to have changed dramatically in the space of a week. When we saw Zelenskyy arriving at the White House today, Donald Trump gave a thumbs up, a fist pump, and there seemed to be a warm handshake. So body language suggesting things could go well?
Yeah, it was rather cordial. Donald Trump in that opening exchange at the doors of the West Wing making reference to President Zelenskyy's outfit. I'm not sure whether it was a compliment or a dig. There is a bit of history between the two men. I think that's worth remembering. The fact that Donald Trump, not just in the past couple of days, has called President Zelenskyy a dictator and then sort of walked back on that. He's also said that he has lots of respect for his Ukrainian counterpart and his country has fought bravely during their war. But there is a further context, of course, which is the shift that we've seen in the United States foreign policy, frankly, towards Russia, and a more sympathetic tone to Moscow, a series of concessions made to Russia even before proper negotiations begun. And as the American and the Russian officials met for the first set of talks, Ukraine notably absent from the table. Then, in terms of both of their relationship to each other on a more personal level, Donald Trump still clearly hostile towards the Ukrainian president off the back of a conversation they had, 5 years ago now, in which Donald Trump seemed to dangle this pledge of aid in front of Volodymyr Zelenskyy in return for the Ukrainian president at the time looking into investigating Joe Biden and his family, that quid pro quo forming the substance of President Trump's first impeachment. Again, now 5 years on, we're seeing this sort of transaction going on with President Trump saying we are going to support you in some ways, but we do want something in return. And that is the fascinating dynamic of Trumpian politics.
Yes, indeed. And Benji, we're just getting some more news out of that conference between Zelenskyy and Trump. Trump says, I am in the middle. I'm for both Ukraine and Russia. So we'll be watching those closely for you throughout the day. Benji, Hyer in Washington, thank you so much for joining me. Now, President Trump has opened the door to a possible trade deal with the UK without tariffs after meeting Prime Minister Keir Starmer at the White House. During a joint press conference, Trump said Starmer was working very hard to persuade him not to impose tariffs on the UK. Let's see more of exactly what he just had to say.
I think there's a very good chance that in the case of these two great friendly countries, I think we could very well end up with a real trade deal where the tariffs wouldn't be necessary. We'll see, but he earned whatever they pay him. He earned today. He was working hard at lunch, and I'm very receptive to it. I think we, in all fairness, in all seriousness, I think we have a very good chance at arriving at a very good deal. JD and Scott and Howard, all the people are working on it, and I think we have a good chance at arriving at a deal that could be terrific, really terrific for both countries.
For more on this, I'm now joined by the Economist, Laurie Laird in London. Laurie, sorry, apologies, I called you the wrong name there. Nice to have you on the show.
Hey, Leigh Ann, nice to see you.
Good to see you. The words trade deal were used during the meeting between the two leaders. So does that mean the UK will avoid these dreaded Trump tariffs, or is it too soon to say for sure? Because, you know, we don't know what Donald Trump is really thinking.
It is soon to tell, and Donald Trump likes to spring a surprise, and certainly doesn't mind sort of going back on policy pronouncements. But I think it looks quite positive for the UK. Look, this is the most unlikely political bromance. Sir Keir Starmer, who's anything but a showman, hails from a left of center policy. The fact that he and Donald Trump have found common cause is utterly remarkable. Starmer played a blinder. He really did to, in the Oval Office, in front of reporters, bring a handwritten invitation from King Charles for a state visit for Donald Trump. That worked. That's the sort of pomp and circumstance that Donald Trump likes. And I think that there seemed to be goodwill between the two men, but I think that may have sealed the deal. We heard trade deal after that written invitation that Trump was holding up. Really clever move, and I hear that they're absolutely punching the air and fist bumping each other in Downing Street. So it looks pretty good for the UK. The other thing that Donald Trump likes, in addition to the royal family, is he admires the fact that the UK left the European Union. He doesn't like the European Union. He's made that clear. And this idea of fucky little Britain coming out of a multilateral, multinational organization, which Donald Trump doesn't like very much, it earns the UK respect in the White House. So there are a couple of things going for the UK here.
You know what? It's so interesting. You just talked there about, the letter that Starmer handed over to Trump. It was just soft power at play, really, wasn't it? Quite remarkable.
Absolutely. And played, Starmer is not considered a man with a particularly deft political touch, but he played this one absolutely brilliantly. The timing, the gesture. Downing Street has every right to be proud here, and they really did need a win at some point.
So we are just days away from the 4th of March, and it's the day Mexico, Canada, and China will be subjected to the Trump tariffs. Will these definitely go ahead, do you think, or will a deal be struck like we saw before?
It's an excellent question. And Trump said yesterday or the day before, he's hard to keep up with, that there really was nothing that Mexico or Canada could do to ward off those tariffs. And it is difficult to see what they could do, particularly in the case of Canada. Donald Trump has linked these tariffs to stopping the flow of fentanyl, an illegal drug, and immigrants across borders. There's just not that much fentanyl or illegal migrants coming in across the Canadian border. Not clear what Canada can do. But one thing, and a cautionary tale here, if the UK is looking for a trade deal with the US, Canada and Mexico already have one of those, and it hasn't stopped Trump from threatening these tariffs. But we'll have to see what happens on Monday. Monday's the 3rd. It's a trading day. I think if the stock market were to wake up to the risk of these tariffs being implemented and we see a down day on the stock market, that could give Trump pause. The level of the stock market is a real metric for him. It's a way he measures his popularity. I think there's also a question of whether his Treasury team sits him down and tries to convince him that this may not be in the interest of the American economy. Some of Trump's cabinet appointees were a little quirky, to say the least. His Treasury picks are pretty standard, pretty well-respected economists. They're not necessarily the loyalists that we've seen in other roles. It's possible that some of these guys may sit Trump down and say, look, you said in the Oval Office yesterday that countries pay these tariffs. It's not true. It's just not true. So could that kind of communication happen over the weekend? It's possible. But watch the stock market, because I think that's a real litmus test for Trump.
That was actually something that I wanted to ask about next. Investor confidence we've seen has really shifted from optimism to uncertainty as President Trump's unpredictable tariff policies really continue to roil markets, causing sharp declines in Europe and China. Do you think we'll see this pattern throughout his term in office?
Yeah, I do. And I think that the one thing that may be worse than the threat of tariffs is this constant variability of policy. It means that companies can't make investment decisions. A company's not going to build a billion-dollar factory if they don't know the status of their inputs, whatever would go into that factory. The other thing to look at, Leigh Ann, and I think this will become something that we talk about in the coming days, is we're really seeing a knock to consumer confidence. We saw a huge fall in some data that came out earlier this week. And a couple of hours ago, we learned that personal spending in the month of January actually fell. We haven't seen that in almost 4 years when the U.S. economy was in the midst of the pandemic. This is concerning. Consumer spending makes up about 2/3 of the entire U.S. economy. If consumers pull in their horns, that is concerning. Add to the fact that the Federal Reserve, the central bank, it may not have access to the tools that it's used to ward off a slowdown in the past, may be reluctant to cut interest rates because U.S. inflation hasn't got back to their 2% target. In fact, it's going the wrong way. It's starting to go back up again. We're seeing a big increase in consumer expectations of inflation, which can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people think prices are going to rise, they ask for pay rises. The cost of those wages goes into a higher cost for a product or a service. So this is concerning. Inflation looks to be on the rise. That's before we even talk about tariffs or retaliatory tariffs. The Federal Reserve, I think, will be reluctant to cut interest rates with inflation proving to be quite sticky.
Yeah, that's a good point. Retaliatory tariffs. We haven't been hearing too much about those, Laurie, but I'm sure that we will be in the future. Economist.
Plenty of time.
Yeah, we've got lots of time to discuss it too. Economist Laurie Laird there. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Talks for the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas have begun in Cairo today. It comes a day before Saturday's deadline of the first phase. Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar confirmed an Israeli delegation have traveled to Egypt to discuss an extension to that agreement. 29 Mexican drug cartels, including a most wanted drug lord, have been sent to the U.S. as the Trump administration cracks down on crime. Rafael Caro Quintero, one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, was handed over as part of the trade war plan to tackle drugs cartels, immigration, and the production of fentanyl. Senior Mexican officials are in Washington ahead of Tuesday's tariff deadline. Up to 41 people are trapped after an avalanche in the Indian Himalayas. It took place near a highway in Uttarakhand's Chamoli region, where workers were taking part in road construction. Authorities say at least 57 workers were buried under the snow. 16 have been rescued so far, whilst 5 are being treated at a military facility. And Pope Francis has spent another peaceful night in hospital and is currently resting. He was taken to Rome's Gemelli Hospital 2 weeks ago after suffering with double pneumonia. A senior cardinal within the Vatican said the pontiff was getting better, albeit slower than what we would like. Now, the pop star Katy Perry is set to blast off into space later this year as part of an historic all-woman flight on Blue-Origin's New Shepard rocket. The fireworks singer will be joined by Blue-Origin owner Jeff Bezos' fiancée, Laurie Sanchez, and other famous faces. For more on this, I'm joined by astronomer Mark Thompson in Norfolk, who's been following this very story. Mark, good evening to you. There hasn't been an all-women space flight for decades now. Can you tell us a bit more about why it's a significant moment in history and for the space industry?
Yeah, well, do you know what? We've not seen an all-women crew since as far back as 1963, when the Russian Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman solo in space astronaut, or sorry, I should say cosmonaut in space. And it's wonderful to see these commercial organisations such as Jeff Bezos and others like Elon Musk sending people from different backgrounds up into space. Now, you know, we've got to set the reality of the situation. You know, they're not spending weeks on the space station. They're just doing or taking a suborbital flight. But it's wonderful because it's opening space up to so many different people now. And it's just demonstrating that almost anyone now can get into space.
I actually wanted to ask you that. Do we have more details on their flight and what it will involve? There won't be a pilot, will there? Quite scary or not?
Not really, no, because what they're experiencing is called a suborbital flight. And in a nutshell, they're going to be launched into space on top of this massive, great rocket. But the module that they will be inside is really not got any rocket power to it. It's got a few engines, but nothing significant enough to be able to get it out into orbit to orbit around the Earth. So they really are just passengers. And even if you had a pilot on board, there's not an awful lot they could do. So what they'll do is they'll just almost like a bullet being fired from a gun. They'll be fired up into the sky. The whole trip lasts for just 11 minutes. And they'll experience about 3 minutes of weightlessness. Now, they will get into space technically because they'll go higher than something called the Kármán line, which is an altitude of 100 kilometers. And that's the demarcation point between the Earth's atmosphere and space. And they'll be above that for a couple of minutes. They will officially get into space, but anyone on board is just going to be a passenger. So you don't need a pilot on board. I think I'd rather have someone there who knows what they're doing there if I was going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I'd definitely like to have someone that knows what's going on. Jeff Bezos, who is, of course, Blue-Origin's owner, has credited his wife, Lauren Sanchez, I don't know if they're married yet, I think they are, for bringing the mission together. She'll also be on the flight. But really, this just doesn't come cheap. You talked about, space tourism, reportedly $200,000 a ticket. What's the future for the likes of you and me and the normal sort of civilian going up there?
Yeah, do you know what? And I think that's the bottom line is for £200,000 or dollars, I want more than just 3 minutes of weightlessness. I want to be on board the space station for a couple of weeks for that. You can get yourself a decent holiday for £200,000, let's face it. So at the moment, it's still something that's for the rich and famous. But the more people that take part in one of these space flights, the more there's a commercial benefit for commercial organizations to get people into space. And the more it's done, it will bring the cost down. And I think within the next 20 odd years, I think the prices will come down to a point which might just be attainable for far more people than they are currently. But whether it will be in my lifetime or not, I just don't know. But it certainly will in the future, as time progresses and more launches are completed, the costs will come down undoubtedly, and it will be something that anyone eventually will be able to do.
Yeah, maybe in our lifetime. We'll wait and see. But yesterday we saw another mission launched into space. The Odin probe is seeing if minerals can be found on an asteroid, which are critical for electronic, medical, and green technology here on Earth. So why is it so crucial that we continue to invest in missions like these, which sound a little bit otherworldly almost?
Yeah, they are, but we've actually, we've mined a lot of the Earth and a lot of these precious minerals, such as platinum, which is what the mission is particularly interested in exploring. It's actually very expensive now to mine platinum on the Earth, and you need it for electronics and as you say, many other different industries rely upon platinum. But it's got to a stage where it's actually cheaper and easier to go into space and mine asteroids than it is to go far enough down, because we've mined as much platinum as we can from the upper layers of the Earth's crust. So it's become more viable commercially to start to explore the mining of asteroids. And there are hundreds upon thousands of decent sized asteroids orbiting around the sun. There's a belt between the orbits, the planets Mars and Jupiter. And if there are loads of lumps of rock that don't have any life there's absolutely no chance of any life existing because they're just far too small to sustain any atmosphere, then absolutely, actually it makes perfect sense to start using some of these lumps of rock, which actually have got a very high metal content, and it makes it easier for us and cheaper ultimately to be able to get hold of these really quite rare commodities that are here down on Earth.
Mark Thompson, absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Hundreds of thousands of people are protesting in Greece, demanding justice on the second anniversary of a train crash that killed 57 people. 2 years after the crash, an inquiry has found that the safety gaps that led to the incident have still not been fixed. No one has been convicted in relation to the accident, and a judicial investigation does remain unfinished. Senior members from Germany's CDU and SPD will begin talks on forming a coalition government. Friedrich Merz, a leader of the conservative CDU and winner of Sunday's election, has said he wants a government in place by the 20th of April. A coalition between these two parties is most likely if the far-right AfD, which placed second, is not considered. The Wall Street Journal has reported President Donald Trump is planning to sign an executive order that would make English the official language of the US for the very first time. English is already the most commonly used language in the country, but the US has never actually had an official national language. It will give federal agencies the flexibility to decide how and when to offer services in languages other than English. It's not yet clear when Trump is expected to sign that executive order. Two Russian divers have been found dead in the Philippines, one in the jaws of a shark. Four men were diving on Thursday afternoon in the resort area of Luzon when they were pulled apart by the current. Shark attacks in the waters around the Philippines are exceptionally rare. Now, more on our top story. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived at the White House for a crucial meeting with President Donald Trump. He's expected to sign a major deal that will give the U.S. access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals in exchange for aid and also military support. It's a sign that the leaders' relationship is back on track, as the deal had seemingly caused a rift between them, with President Trump even calling Zelenskyy a dictator for refusing to hold elections. However, the president denied saying this during a press conference with the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer last night. Let's take a quick look.
A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast, because that war is going in the wrong direction. And
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelenskyy is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
For more on this, I'm now joined by the Ukrainian MP, Rudik, in Kyiv. Great to have you on the show, Kira. Thank you so much for joining us. So, pure denial from Trump this week that he ever called Zelenskyy a dictator. Would you argue the time for name-calling is over and Ukraine must work towards what's most important, which is peace? But Kira, I just want to bring you some other news that we're hearing. We're hearing that during this meeting between Zelenskyy and President Trump, there have been raised voices in the Oval Office. So I think things are a little bit tense. Kira, can you hear me?
Yes, there were perhaps interruptions. I'm sorry, I'm running on the diesel generators because of the recent Russian attacks. There were electricity interruptions.
Great. Can you hear me now, Kira?
Yes. I
can.
Oh,
okay, great. Thank you so much. Just to repeat what I did say, we are hearing that there has been some excuse me, arguing between Trump and Zelenskyy in the Oval Office. Do you know any more?
No, unfortunately, this is the first time I hear about that. I can tell you that we in Ukraine have high hopes on this meeting because with everything that has been said, we want to reiterate that the goal of this meeting is not for President Zelenskyy and President Trump to become friends, right? The goal for it is to figure out how to stand together against the threat that is Russia and that is threatening not only Ukraine, but actually the democratic world with everything that they are manufacturing, allying with Iran and North Korea and China. So I do hope that no matter how emotional and exhausted these talks can be, we keep the goal in mind, keep the bigger picture in mind. And I wish to President Zelenskyy to be wise, because he needs to bring to Ukrainian people back some idea of how to practically deliver peace.
Yes, and that's exactly why he's gone there. He's going there to talk to Donald Trump to see if he can get security measures in place for Ukraine. We believe the minerals deal has been agreed and will be signed by both the US and Ukraine. Whilst meeting Zelenskyy right now, Trump has said Ukraine will have to make compromises. What exactly do you think he means by compromises, Kira?
Well, I think nobody in the world can tell exactly what President Trump means, because these opinions sometimes change. But I can tell you that no matter what the opinion is, there are certain things that Ukraine wouldn't compromise on. We wouldn't compromise on our sovereignty. We wouldn't compromise on our future. We wouldn't compromise on our ability to defend ourselves. And Russia demanded many times that Ukraine will switch from our European path. Russia demanded that we wouldn't arm ourselves because they wanted us to be weak. And this is not something that we can do because we already have seen what the promises of Russia are. Leigh, you see, President Trump said many times that he thinks that Putin wants peace. There has been no fact at all that would support this theme. And I can tell you, being in Kiev, that there has not been a day that Russia would stop attacking us since those statements, and it was not a day when they would stop attacking us at the front line. And so the energy outages, the people sitting at the bomb shelter, it is all just confirming what we have been telling the world. Russia does not want peace. And if they wanted peace, it would be very simple to achieve. They just need to pull out their troops and stop the war that they started.
Yes, indeed. And earlier, actually, I did see that President Trump in the Oval Office did say that he feels like he's in the middle. He's in the middle when it comes to Russia and when it comes to Ukraine. So obviously things are tense, but you have another solution when it comes to raising funds for Ukraine and rebuilding its infrastructure. Can you tell us more on this?
Of course. So President Trump wanted to receive Ukraine's rare minerals. But even from Ukraine's side, it is such a far-fetched goal that will require massive investment and may only bring the capital in many years. But there is still 300 billion euros stored in Belgium Euroclear depository. These are Russian money of Russian central bank that were frozen since the beginning of full-scale invasion. And it is a fair and just way to go ahead and confiscate them and use them for the sake of supporting Ukraine. If Donald Trump needs quick wins, it could be used for compensating of some of the US expenses that they think need to be compensated. But it is just such a different approaches of taking the victims' rare minerals when working with Ukraine, or taking the aggressors' money that are already here and will be can be confiscated really quickly. This is what we want to offer Donald Trump, and I hope it was brought up as well during this meeting.
Kira, actually, Trump has just said to Zelensky, you either make a deal or we are out. So pretty strong words there from Donald Trump right now while they are negotiating, as you say, the future of Ukraine. Do you think that Zelensky can make a deal? Do you think that there's something that can come out of this meeting that's positive?
We don't know which deal President Trump is talking about. If it is a rare minerals deal, from what I know, the framework was agreed beforehand for both sides. And so President Zelensky was coming there with understanding that there are deals that are going to be signed. So I'm not worried about that at all. And it's hard to talk like what is President Trump is referring to. However, after this framework deal, there would need to be another detailed deal that will be ratified by Ukrainian parliament, which member I am. And then we will have to go through every detail, and it will be a tough political discussion because we will be talking about the rare minerals that are belonging to Ukrainian people, and that we will basically have to figure out as a way of properly do this real deal. We are ready to do this. It will require many changes to current Ukrainian legislation. And I want to remind everyone that the majority of the rare minerals are located right now at the temporarily occupied territories. So to make it work, we will need a resource to take those territories back. I don't know what President Trump is talking about, but of course, I wish President Zelensky to be wise and to have our nation best interest in mind, no matter what he hears there in the White House.
Kira, we saw both Macron and Starmer at the White House this week. So both France and the UK have been incredibly supportive of Ukraine. What's your reaction been to their visits? And do you think it's softened Trump's administration's take on Ukraine?
I think Donald Trump was very clear, and it cannot be read differently, that Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own security. And I think the visit by President Macron and Prime Minister Keir Starmer intended to say we are ready to take more responsibility, but we cannot have this like split between the United States and European countries in terms of security, in terms of the economy, because we in democratic world need to stick together. So I hope and I believe that Ukraine was a top topic in these discussions, because everyone wants to end the war, but we need to find a practical, executable way of not only ending the war, but actually making sure that Russia would not attack us again. There has already been certain solutions in the past, and by where we are right now, I can definitely tell you these solutions didn't work. So we need not to repeat the mistakes of the past and find a way of moving forward to the point that Russia would not attack not only Ukraine, but any other European country.
Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate your time. Let's take a look at the top business news. Cryptocurrency prices are down sharply in recent weeks as Trump's fueled euphoria fades. The biggest digital assets have erased nearly all of the gains they made after Donald Trump's election win, which triggered a wave of excitement. Bitcoin has fallen 21% from its peak in January, and nearly $1 trillion has been wiped off crypto markets, and that's since December. Skype, the video calling service used by 300 million people every month, is being shut down for good on the 5th of May. Microsoft said the program's days are numbered as the company pushes people towards its Teams app instead. Now, oil prices are down 1% and are heading for their first monthly drop, and that's since November. That's after markets brace for Washington's tariff threats and Iraq's decision to resume oil exports from the Kurdistan region. Uncertainty surrounding OPEC's production resumption plans in April and ongoing peace talks to end the war in Ukraine are also weighing on investor sentiment. Turning to sports news now, and Emma Raducanu will compete at Indian Wells next week after the Dubai security incident. This will be her first tour appearance after a man exhibited fixated behavior towards her and was removed from the stands. According to reports, Raducanu will be given extra security at the Indian Wells competition. And Jake Knapp has become the 15th player to record a sub-60 round in PGA Golf Tour history. He shot to 12 under par 59 in the Cognizant Classic in Florida. The world number 99 begins his opening round with 5 straight birdies and added a further 7 in his remaining 13 holes at the PGA National in Palm Beach Gardens. Now, a reminder of today's top stories. Zelenskyy arrives at the White House for talks with President Trump as the two prepare to sign the rare earth deal. There are reports the two leaders have raised their voices whilst they have been having those discussions in the Oval Office. And the UK could swerve the wrath of Trump's tariffs as Starmer charms the US president in Washington. Plus, blasting into the history books, Katy Perry signs up for an all-female flight to space with Jeff Bezos' company, Blue-Origin. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And of course, don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with G&T. Good night and happy Friday.